Minister, you announced a great fanfare in the budget that you were finally going to address the issue of the difficulties that homeowners with properties with pyrite have had in relation to accessing their legitimate right to an exemption from the local property tax. Now, obviously, this is something that has been sought for almost 2 years consistently. I'd like to know what's the meat on what you're proposing, when is it likely to come in, and any other details that you might have.
Thank you. Minister number 8.
Yes, I'd like to thank the Deputy for raising this again by way of parliamentary question. The Deputy has raised it on a number of occasions, and I have moved to meet the concerns that she expresses on behalf of the householders involved. I announced on Budget Day that I am accepting the recommendations made by Dr Thornhill in his review of the local property tax in relation to those properties that have been damaged to a significant extent by pyrite. Revenue has agreed to my request that the change in procedure be implemented on an administrative basis, pending the enactment of the necessary legislation. Dr Thornhill recommended the continuation of the exemption from local property tax for properties with significant pyrite damage, for the most part in line with the current arrangements. The exemption is to continue to be restricted to those properties that have been certified as having a damage rating of 2 or 1 with progression. The damage must be proved by inspection and testing by a competent person, such as an engineer, in accordance with a standard published by the National Standards Authority of Ireland. He also stated that where property owners elect not to incur the cost of testing, they have the option of submitting a self-assessed value to revenue for the property, which in their view reflects its current market value, taking account of the possible presence of pyrite. Dr Thornhill also recommends that the requirement for the certification of the pyrite damage by a competent person be relaxed in certain limited circumstances. Firstly, where the Pyrite Remediation Board has agreed to remediate a property without carrying out the usual laboratory testing that definitely established the presence of pyrite. Where this happens, Revenue will accept confirmation from the Pyrite Remediation Board that it has accepted a particular property into its remediation scheme, in lieu of certification by a competent person. Secondly, where a relevant party, such as a guarantee company, an insurance company or a builder or developer, accepts responsibility for the remediation of a damaged property or agrees to fully compensate the property owner in lieu of remediation. Where this happens, Revenue will accept documentary evidence that the relevant party has given an appropriate commitment to remediate the property or to fund the necessary remediation works.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Clare Daly.
Well, if any homeowner was listening in, far from thinking that the process has got simpler, I'd say their head will be absolutely splitting after listening to the Minister there. The reality is that many of these people have had hundreds, if not more than €1,000, in some instances deducted from their wages for properties that are simply valueless. Now, I'm not clear, based on the Minister's responses, do we have to wait for legislation for this new arrangement to come in? When is that legislation going to be tabled? And is it the case that it is still restricted to a duration of an exemption for 3 years? Because frankly, I don't think that's good enough, given that the property continues to be essentially valueless, not capable of being sold, not capable of being extended or improved in any way forward. So the suggestions made by Dr Thornhill may be a slight relaxation, but I don't think they go in anywhere far enough, and I think it's regrettable that the Dáil hasn't been given an opportunity in any forum to discuss those issues prior to any legislative change. So is that envisaged, and when are we going to see legislation if that's what it's dependent on?
Minister.
Yeah, as I said earlier in my reply, Revenue has agreed to my request that the changes in procedures be implemented on an administrative basis, pending the enactment of the necessary legislation. And I am also advised that Revenue is currently preparing guidelines for the purpose of implementing Dr Thornhill's recommendations on an administrative basis, and that these will be published by the end of November. And on the issue of legislation, well, the Dáil runs until the middle of December and is scheduled to return after Christmas. So the intention is to legislate.
Deputy Clare Daly.
I take it then that in the worst case scenario for a homeowner where, say, no ground testing has been carried out, they themselves can assess the value of the property. Presumably, if it's incapable of being sold because it has pyrite and so on, it's going to return a very minor value and therefore be open to a very small property tax, and that revenue will agree to that. My second question really is whether the duration of the exemption is being altered in any way by the suggestions made by Dr Thornhill.
Thank you. Minister, to conclude.
Yeah, the nub of the problem, as I understood it from yourself, Deputy, and from others who raised it, was that the exemption could only be triggered by a test, which sometimes cost an enormous amount of money, well in excess of any relief that would be provided. So that's being removed. The Revenue now are prepared to take evidence a lot less than testing, and I've outlined the different types of evidence they will take, but they'll take self-assessment as well, which is probably the simplest one. Now, we'll be clearer when they incorporate what I gave in my answer into the guidelines that they intend publishing in the next 2 weeks. And after that then, the intention is to enshrine this in law, but it will operate before the legislation is implemented on an administrative basis, and I have the agreement of the Revenue to this. There isn't a proposal to extend the period, but we can look at that when the legislation comes.
Deputy Sean.